Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So let's get started right away. So we have to finish a part of the material that precedes the midterm. This would be essentially, I think, the last unit or the last chapter that we covered before the midterm exam next week. So today we're going to be talking about chapter 11 in your book, which deals with the theory of government intervention. Or government interventionism in general. So the main question that we are going to be trying to address today is, what is the proper scope of government intrusion or government intervention in the economic life? So that's the main scope of government involvement in the economy. And this is one of these areas, one of the areas where there is no complete consensus about economists. What is the proper way for government to intervene, and what is the proper scope and scale of government interventions? How much government should be spending? What are the functions of government? Functions, proper functions of government. Then what are the best ways to discharge those functions, even if we agree about them? Ways, forms of government, of achieving the goals that we agree that the government should be achieving. So unlike some other things that we studied thus far, especially the ones pertaining to the price theory and free trade and so on, where there is a considerable agreement among economists, this is one of the areas where there doesn't seem to be much agreement. And there are different ways of looking at the problem and different arguments for and against. And what is more important, there are different theories about different economic theoretical conceptualizations of what should be done through government to improve on the economic outcomes. So this will going to contain two different steps. This analysis of government interventions will proceed in two steps. The first step will be arguments for market imperfections and arguments for intervention. In a variety of areas. And the second aspect will be difficulties, theoretical difficulties or problems in applying those principles or reasons for government intervention that we might identify. Throughout, we're going to assume, or we're going to make one important assumption here, that the way how we would look at the economic interventionism of the government interventionism in the economy is the economic approach. So it's not a philosophical approach or normative approach that says this should or shouldn't be done, or such and such philosophical reasons require us to, for example, regulate the economy or spend money on social welfare. We're going to be analyzing economic, which means cost-benefit approach. The economic approach is a cost-benefit. We're going to start from the assumption that a pretty common sense one. In some cases, government intervention might make sense, it might be required. In some other cases, It might not be, and the reason how we make decisions in all doubtful cases is not by looking at the moral attitude that we or majority in society have or has about the intervention, but rather at economic costs and benefits of these interventions. There is one, in order to do so, there is one kind of semi-philosophical or quasi-philosophical point or starting point that we have to accept that is not commonly accepted. That is that there is no difference between private and public competition. That the motivations that people have in their capacity as business people and individual economic agents on the market are the same motivations that people have as political agents. So private and public competition are the same, driven by the same motivations, by the same ideas. And these motivations are individual utility maximization. So that means businessmen and workers and all other individual economic agents, they do whatever they do in order to maximize their own consumer or producer satisfaction to achieve certain individual goals that they have, that we in economics describe as utility maximization. Utility is usefulness or satisfaction that we derive from having certain things that we want to have. The key assumption here is that politicians and bureaucrats do the exact same thing. That they want to achieve certain individual personal goals by engaging in political activity, by engaging in passing legislation, by engaging in applying regulation. They also want to achieve individual personal goals. So this concept of public interest as something categorically different from private interest doesn't have any room in economics. Cannot be justified methodologically in economics. If you remember the very first class, we said that economics is a science that uses or that accepts methodological individualism. It means that we start the analysis of everything, functioning of the market, as well as the functioning of government intervention by starting from. So public interest, what is public interest? That's what certain persons, certain people, certain individuals describe as such. That is, a public interest is just a collection of individual private interests of millions of people. So that's an overarching assumption that you have to emancipate, we have to emancipate ourselves from this habit of thought about politics in which you have almost a kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde anthropology. Like in the morning, I'm a private person engaged in my private affairs. I'm selfish and greedy. And in the afternoon, when I'm a politician or regulator speaking in the name of government, I'm selfless and altruistic, and I want to protect public interests. So economists don't buy this dualistic, schizophrenic picture of human nature. People are selfish, and they want to achieve selfish gains no matter what they do. And by selfish, I don't necessarily mean something ethically abominable. I just mean individual interests that might or might not coincide with the individual interests of other people in economic life as well as in political life. Okay, the next important point to bear in mind here is that the government action, government activity, involves always costs, trade-offs. So whatever the government decides to spend the money on, that involves opportunity costs, which means that some value is being destroyed by government action that could have been created otherwise. You'll remember the same principle that we attribute to individual action applies to government action as well. When I buy a certain quantity of steel to supply my manufacturing plant that produces BMW, I'm actually reducing potentially production of something else that some other private company could have produced with the same steel. The exact same thing applies when the government buys steel or aluminum or any other scarce resource. The government is displacing other possibilities of using the same resources. So then, the conclusion is that the same reasoning or the same benchmarks for assessing government projects should be used as the one that is used to assess the private viability or advisability of private projects. So in theory, we say that the government should, you have marginal benefits, you have marginal costs, and any government activity should be continued. Here is the quantity, here is the price or cost. So marginal benefits decline, we know that, or the demand. You will remember one of the ways to define the demand curve for anything, including public goods, anything that the government produces, is declining. Every next unit is valuable less than the previous one. The first stadium that the government builds probably has the greatest value than the second one, or the second road, or the second public good that government produces has an than the previous one, whereas the costs increase as you keep increasing production. So now the general rule of how much government spending should there be, that's the question. The easy and general answer to that question is that you keep increasing government spending or government activity until you reach the point where marginal costs equal marginal benefits. That further increasing the level of activity would simply impose too high costs. So marginal benefits should equal marginal cost. Any government activity whatsoever. So now, what is the problem with this? What is the difference? Can you tell me? What is the problem in evaluating the efficiency of government projects vis-a-vis efficiency of private investment? Is there any significant difference? And if so, what this difference would be? How people can evaluate, how you as an independent observer, uninvolved independent observer can judge whether or gauge or estimate whether a certain private investment was efficient or not. Whether some particular use of resources was efficient or not from a societal point of view. Look at private investment. Yeah, profit and loss. So there are objective standards in private business. Profit and loss are objective standards of efficiency. What is this objective standard in government spending? Do we have any objective standard? profit and loss apply to government agencies? Can federal government go bankrupt? In a certain sense. I mean, it can, in a kind of metaphorical way, if it doesn't pay back the debt. But looking at the daily operations of different government departments, you don't have a profit and loss system because you don't have private property in the government. You don't have competition in providing government services. So there is no profit and loss test for assessing the efficiency or productivity of government investment. That's one of the major problems and one of the major differences between the government and the private markets. And this is connected to one basic fact having to do with the very definition of government and what government does. Can you give me a definition of government? How would you define government, the state?
Different branches.
Sorry?
Different branches.
Oh, there are different branches, but that's just a further description. But we need first a definition of what government, any government, even an authoritarian government. What is the similarity between an autocratic government which doesn't have different branches, it doesn't have the division of powers, and a democratic government? What every government has, what every government does. Yeah, it can regulate business. Why? Why government can regulate business? Why don't businesses regulate themselves? Or one particular firm? Why doesn't Bill Gates regulate American business? Or some Harvard professor of economics? Do you think that the government can get corrupted? Yes, but it still can regulate business. What else governments do that nobody else can do? Let's make a list. They can regulate business. What else can they do? They can do. If you steal something, what's going to happen to you? Can I arrest you in America? Legally? No. Who arrests you? Police. Police is a government agency. So, suppressing crime or punishing crime is a government. That's what government does. Adjudicating disputes. You sue me, then it's not my cousin or your mom who's arbitrating between us, it's the government court. So what is the main difference between the government and private agents? The government has one power that nobody else has. There's a power to coerce, monopoly of coercion. State equals monopoly of coercion. That's Max Weber, German sociologist in the early 20th century, said that the state is a territorial, it's an agency having a territorial monopoly of power, monopoly of coercion over a given population. So all of these features that we identify can regulate business, can arrest somebody, can punish crime, can impose taxes. Can I impose taxes on you? No. So what are taxes? How would you define taxes? What is the difference between taxes and payments for goods and services on the market? What is the main difference? Both are payments for certain services. You pay for the government services through taxes, and you pay for goods or services that private firms produce, but with one major difference. Can you not pay taxes? theoretically, if you, I was going to say something, I will not. But in principle, you cannot. If they catch you not paying taxes, you're toast. You're criminally liable. Whereas if you refuse to pay money to Jeff Bezos for his services, Jeff Bezos cannot arrest you. So taxation is another form of coercive transfer of money, coercive redistribution of money. So the main hallmark of the state, the main hallmark of the government, that it uses coercion, whereas private agents need to use persuasion. In order for you to pay the money to somebody, you have to have certain positive reason or certain expectation of a benefit that you will derive from the transaction. Now, this is not nice. If I imagine that there was no government at all, I'm going to say you all have to pay 20% to me every month, or else I'm going to put you in jail, and that's okay because I'm gonna protect you against other people, against other nasty people, against criminals and so on. And I'm gonna make life better. I'm going to build roads for us and so on, but give me the money. So you would think that that's kind of fishy. Who do you think you are that you can extract 20% of our income? And government does exactly that. Now, as you might expect, for such an extraordinary privilege to have the ability, to have the legally sanctioned ability to extract other people's money coercively, you better provide certain justification. And there are, of course, different justifications for this monopolistic privilege of government, but we're going to list some economic models or economic explanations for the necessity to have the government. So we are not going just to assume, as everybody does almost all the time, that we need a government and only kooks and slightly problematic people, anarchists, question the necessity of government. We're going to assume that we start from a free market economy and then we observe governments all around us, and then we ask the question, is there any economic justification for the government, and what this justification would be look like. There are different ways of thinking about this. The most common model that justifies even the minimal government will have to abide by. The minimal government being the government which is reduced only on the most basic elementary functions, such as protection against crime, internally and against foreign aggressor from the outside, and legal disputes, contract enforcement and legal disputes. So that's so-called libertarian, like a minimal state or night watchman state. You've heard about that term. American philosopher Robert Nozick coined it. He says that state should be like a night watchman. It shouldn't meddle into people's affairs, regulate and boss them around, tell them what to do in any shape or form, including business regulations, which should be completely free from. The only thing is that the government should be a night watchman who watches over our property and our physical security. Even in that version, we need a government, we need at least police, military, and judiciary. And the economic justification for that is something called theory of public goods. Public goods. This theory was developed, or I should say maybe formalized, not invented out of whole cloth, but formalized by economist Paul Samuelson in 1948. in a paper called The Pure Theory of Public Goods. You might remember that I mentioned this theory in passing last time as the second generation theory of market failure. The first generation being this theory of externality that we talked about last time. Negative externalities and positive externalities, and negative externalities being the first generation of the theories of market failure, in which you have a problem of private firms creating higher costs that they're forced to pay, and then the third-party effects, negative third-party effects of economic activity that has to be somehow compensated, and the free market doesn't do that, such as in the cases of environmental pollution. So we need a government intervention, government rectificatory action through taxes and subsidies to even out externalities. Now, the theory of public goods is the next generation of market failure theories that comes along about 3 years after this original one. And it starts from paradoxically, from positive externalities. It says that the concept of positive externalities leads to the necessity for at least police, military, and judiciary, potentially even for a more expansive government. But at the bare minimum, this is what the theory of public goods says. The gist of the theory is that there are certain goods and services that cannot be produced on the market profitably by private firms. There are certain goods and services that cannot be produced by private markets because they're associated with large positive externalities. Large positive externalities. Such as, for example, military protection or police protection. So imagine that I'm a private provider of national security. Imagine that we privatize the government tomorrow, that we abolish the federal government outright, and then I'm one potential supplier of, let's say, intercontinental ballistic protection against intercontinental ballistic missiles from North Korea or Iran or wherever, the United States. And imagine that I want to sell my services to the American public. Now, what is the main characteristic of any business? Any successful private business? Balancing costs and revenue. So that means that you charge for however many units you sell, and you then collect the revenue and compare it with costs. But the basic precondition for this is that you can exclude the non-paying customers. If I'm producing bicycles and selling bicycles to you, only people who pay for the bicycle can get one. You cannot free ride on other people having bicycles and enjoying driving a bicycle unless you buy one from me. So there is this concept of excludability, which is precondition of any efficient market operation. Excludability. You see that this excludability criterion is tightly connected to the very definition of private property rights. If I don't have the ability to exclude everybody else from enjoying my property, I'm not the real true private property owner, private owner of something. So now, can you apply the same principle of excludability that it's easily applicable to most market transactions to military protection against intercontinental ballistic missiles? Can I provide protection against intercontinental missiles only to people in this room? Let's say that you are all a bunch of billionaires who want to pay for protection against Kim Jong-un, and I would be ready to supply you with protection. Can I provide it only to you, but exclude not your family members, but your relatives and other people in Bismarck, North Dakota, or other people in the United States, for that matter? So it's very difficult for me to sell the product to you without creating huge positive externalities for everybody else. If you pay for me, if you pay to me for this nuclear shield, you're gonna enjoy it, but millions of other people will also be protected without paying a cent for it. So huge positive externality, positive spillover, which means what is positive externality? That people enjoy benefits for which they didn't pay anything. So now, what is the problem here? Can you finish the train of thought here, the chain of deduction? What is the next step here? What other people would think and do? They would know. Everybody would know from the very beginning that they don't have to pay. And after a while, you would realize too, why would I be the only sucker to pay for this thing when I can enjoy, I can free ride on everybody else like all other people. So what is the end game here? If everybody knows that a private provider cannot charge you, cannot exclude you from enjoying the benefits of his product, even if you don't pay, you won't pay. So we will end up in a situation in which nobody would pay for military protection as a private good. So that's the definition of public good. That's a good that cannot be produced on the private market because a private provider of that good cannot exclude free riders, cannot exclude the non-paying customers from enjoying the benefits of the service. Yeah, does that make sense? And something similar is with police, actually. I police the crime, I'm a police officer and a private agency that is only solving the murders or robberies for people who are paying customers of my own private security agency. And I solve a couple of criminal problems in your neighborhood for my own customers, then I increase the quality of I reduce the crime rate and improve the situation in your neighborhood, even for the people who are not my customers. So the same, maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but still than in the case of nuclear protection. People usually say that military protection is the purest form of a public good. This public good character of the service is the most obvious in the case of military protection. But police as well, and judiciary. Imagine a situation in which you have just a private court, private arbitration mechanism that enforces the contract. It will improve the situation by making the conditions more predictable for everybody else, but only people who are the clients of the court or the arbitration system would be paying for that. So the same mechanism exists in the military protection, police, judiciary, the public good problem. So then what is the conclusion here? The conclusion is that we need the system that will punish the free riders. And that's a system of taxation. So everybody has to pay. Since nobody would pay in a private system, if we privatize the government, then we need to force everybody to pay an equal share or an unequal share, depending on what kind of system of taxation we consider to be efficient or just, but the principle is the same. Everybody has to pay. So that's the source, that's the most conventional justification of government, of the very existence of government, even the minimal government. The problem of public goods created by positive, extremely large positive externalities of private provision of those goods or services that leads to the impossibility of their private provision eventually. So we need to rectify the situation by forcing everybody to pay to one single monopolistic provider, which is the government. So that's the reason why we prohibit competition in the provision of military. Military services, police services, judicial ones. Any questions? So now, of course, we know that the government activity is usually much broader than these few basic functions of law and order, military protection, and police. Can you list a couple of other functions, that the governments have that go beyond these three? What other goods or services governments provide? Military, law and order. That's the common term for police and judiciary. That's your minimal state or night watchman state. Okay, but modern governments do much more than that. What else modern governments do? Yeah, build roads, okay. Roads, infrastructure, what you call infrastructure. What else?
Foreign relations are like they don't want to
Can a bit louder.
foreign relations.
Oh, foreign relations. Okay, foreign relations. Oh, we can subsume that under the first two. Oh, okay. Here bracketed foreign relations. But to the degree that this corresponds to protection against foreign aggression, then it could be subsumed indirectly under the military and law and order functions. But to the degree that we, now it depends what we mean by foreign relations. If we pursue like a traditional American isolationist foreign policy, so we want just to protect our national security against foreign enemies, then you can say it is subsumed. It could be reduced to law and order and military. But we'll see, it gets more complicated once we define foreign policy in a broader sense, that we pursue other goals in foreign policy beyond just narrow protection of national security. Okay, what else? In domestic policy, what else governments do that is not reducible to law and order plus military formula? What the federal government does. You mentioned earlier one of these things that the governments do. Money. Okay, monetary policy. Okay, very well. What else? Like 60% of federal budget goes to one specific function of government, which is controversial in modern sense. Yeah, social welfare. Social welfare spending. What else? Education. State budgets. Like a lion's share of state budgets in American states goes for education. Of course, the police and firefighters and so on, and pensions of public sector employees as well. But education is a major item. Not so much federal government, although there is a Department of Education, but it doesn't spend nearly as much as the states. What else? What is the major activity that both state and federal governments routinely engage in? It's all pervasive. In the 20th and 21st centuries. It was relatively less pervasive in the 19th century. Also, social welfare spending is new. James Madison thought unimaginable that anyone would have dreamt of using the federal government of the United States for social welfare spending, helping the poor. So that was palpably and directly and unequivocally unconstitutional. But times they are changing, and now people believe that that's constitutional. What else? Business regulation. Regulations. Bossing people around, telling them you can do this, but you cannot do that. That's a thing that a modern government does routinely. What are justifications for all of this? Can you give me some kind of explanations or guesses, or what kind of arguments are invoked for all of these additional functions of government? What are the usual arguments for social welfare spending? Why do we need it? Yeah, helping like moral or ethical reasons. What about education? What is the justification for government investing in education, government financing public schools? Okay, so this is one very good argument, or at least very commonly used argument, that you need government subsidies to education because it increases economic productivity. There are all kinds of studies that associate there's a correlation between the level of education and income. So then the argument is, even if you don't buy ethical arguments that we need to help poor kids who cannot afford to go to high school or college or whatever, you need to accept it from a narrowly reason for a narrow position of efficiency, because the better educated society will be a wealthier society and economically more productive one. So then we need the government taxation and spending in the field of education for the reasons of economic productivity. What about regulations? We're talking now about the goals and justifications. We will see in a moment what are the problems, what are the roadblocks in achieving all of these goals. We are now assuming as if the government can achieve costlessly, 100% efficiently, the goals that it establishes. We're criticizing neither the scope of the government, potential scope, nor the instruments that the government uses, or the possibility of efficient discharge of these policies. So, regulations, can you give me a couple of justifications for government regulation? Sorry? Yeah, monopoly. So there could be reasons of providing greater level of economic efficiency. So it's better to have a competitive system rather than monopoly. Very good. What else? How about environmental protection? So this is not narrowly economic efficiency reason, but environmental protection. Whole variety of different ethical or moral philosophical reasons, such as labor legislation, minimum wage. So motivation is to help the poor people. So again, sometimes regulation and social welfare and educational spending have the same goal. That's a redistribution of income from wealthier and more fortunate people to less fortunate. So sometimes regulation and these forms of spending have a common goal. Not always, but in some cases. So, for example, progressive taxation is an instrument of social welfare policy. What is progressive taxation? Can you tell me that? Progressive taxes, how does that work? What does that mean? So have flat taxes. That means whatever income you have, you pay a certain percentage. You earn 1 million, you pay 10%, that's 100,000. You earn 10,000, you pay 10%. It doesn't change with the level of your income. With progressive taxation or graduated income tax, you have division of your income into different brackets, 3, 4, 5 brackets. So for the first 25,000, you don't pay anything. For the next 25,000, you pay lower rate. And then above a certain level, you pay the highest rate. So more money you have, more taxes you pay. In percentage terms, not only in absolute terms, in percentage terms. Greater percentage of you pay. Why is there graduated income tax? What is the main justification for that? Sometimes in lingo of the democratic politicians, that's called they need to pay their fair share. Wealthy people pay their fair share when they pay not only greater amount of taxes, but greater percentage of their income in taxes. First, redistributionist ethics, taking money from wealthy people and giving to the poor people. So the same thing applies to some forms of government regulation, such as minimum wage or rent controls that we studied thus far. I'm not talking about the efficiency of these measures. I'm just talking about the justification for all these measures. So we can say that there is a justification of public goods, and there is a justification of a redistributionist ethics that underlies certain types of government spending and regulation, and that there is a justification of providing for greater economic efficiency, that some regulations are geared towards increasing economic efficiency. What is the goal of monetary policy? We haven't talked about that yet. What do you think? What is the goal of monetary policy? Who conducts monetary policy in the United States? Is it the president? Who is the main? What is the main institution in the United States that does monetary policy? One. You know that's it's based in Washington, D.C. They have very nice. What is it? A monumental building in which they work. It's one of the grossest examples of monumental architecture in the United States is the building of this institution that does monetary policy. No. What is Pentagon? What is Pentagon? Which department of government is that? Pentagon is a. It's not really monumental architecture, Pentagon. No, it belongs to the executive branch. It's a department of the executive branch. Military, defense department. That's Pentagon. I say Pentagon, the spokesman of Pentagon said this, it means the spokesman or spokeswoman of Department of Defense, military. That's the largest federal department, the Department of Defense. This part, I can help you, I can give you a hint. It's not formally a part of federal government, of the executive branch. It's an independent institution. No. Is Treasury independent from the executive branch? Who is the Secretary of Treasury? Steven Mnuchin, appointed by President Trump. He's a part of the cabinet. That's the executive branch. Treasury, defense, education, commerce, and so on. Treasury has to do something with money, but it does more fiscal policy, which means taxation and spending, makes decisions and proposals about that. Federal Reserve System, the central bank. That's an institution that does monetary policy in most modern countries. What is the goal of monetary policy? It has also to do something with efficiency. Stability of prices and preventing recessions and business cycles. Okay. Now let's turn to some of the criticisms or some caveats that we might have about the ability of government to discharge all of these functions. So I had to develop an economic theory of the political system, which is called the public choice theory. Which is just the economic theory to political action. You use the principles of supply and demand and costs and benefits and individual utility maximization to study what politicians do, what bureaucrats do, and what voters do. Voters and bureaucrats. That's the political system, it's a triangle. So we treat political system as a system of supply and demand in which politicians offer supply public policies and voters buy them through the elections. The key assumption here is that the government system is inefficient, that it will create major inefficiencies in discharging all of these functions here because of the internal dynamics and the way how political market works. That both politicians and voters and bureaucrats have very twisted and perverse incentives to behave in a way which is inimical to the achievement of any goals of government efficiency. So let's start with voters. What is your goal as a voter if you start from a utility maximizing position? What would be a goal of an average voter? Why people vote? What would be the most cynical explanation? The most kind of... You wanted to comment? No. Self-interest. It's a material self-interest. So you actually vote in such a way as to minimize your tax burden and to increase to maximize the amount of money and benefits that you get from the government. So that's your motivation. Now, what is the process whereby you choose government representatives? By voting in an election. What are the characteristics of the decision-making mechanism? You vote for one person, typically for one party. Every party and every candidate offer a combination of different policies, which may differ. And you have different preferences, just like you have different preferences for different individual products in the marketplace. You might have, or usually you have, different preferences for different parts of the party platforms. I might like President Trump's deregulation policy and low tax policy, but I might hate his tariff policy towards China and his foreign policy. So in my ideal world, if I could, I would buy, quote unquote, I would vote for Trump to do the business of deregulating the economy and lowering the taxes, while electing somebody else to conduct trade policy and foreign policy, which I don't like in Trump's case. Can I do that as a voter? No. It's take it or leave it. It's Trump versus Biden. So that's a problem. That's not a usual situation in the marketplace. You don't have to buy a chocolate cake if you want to buy a bicycle in Walmart, typically. Much smaller degree of individualization of products. They tie many other products with anything that you want to buy in the political markets, which makes the political exchange much less efficient and much less utility maximizing for the voter than for the individual consumer in the market. You see, imagine that you were always blackmailed by private sellers of private goods, that whenever you want to buy something, you need to buy 5 or 6 other things that you might not need at that time. That you have to pay the real money for that. So that's the analogy. So it is much less efficient mechanism of decision making because it imposes much higher costs on a decision maker, on a buyer, quote unquote, than in the regular marketplace. What else is the problem with voters? When I buy something on the marketplace, I pay the costs and I get the benefits directly. Whether you are going to buy a bicycle or not doesn't affect my ability to buy it directly. I don't need your concurrence. I don't need to poll all of you and to find 51% of you liking chocolate cake in order for me to buy and enjoy chocolate cake. It's perfectly democratic system. Can I enjoy Donald Trump being elected as a president and pursuing my policies, even if I agree 100% with him, without 50% of the rest of you, of the electoral college, or whatever the system is, agreeing with me? No. So I depend on other people. Your decision to buy or not to buy is not the end of the story. You need concurrence of other people in order for you to enjoy the consequences of your choice. That's a second disadvantage. And finally, it doesn't matter whatever you do. You are one among the million people. The likelihood that your vote will matter in the case of an election is extremely low. So very rarely in American history it happened that there was a tie, the exact tie, and then your vote may be the deciding vote. So if that's the case, if you know that it doesn't matter whether you are gonna, it doesn't matter how you vote for the final outcome of the elections, then it's very rational for you either not to vote at all or to be ignorant about the particularities of the political platforms or programs that candidates offer. That's called rational ignorance. That means, why would I bother losing my time and energy and paying the real costs to learn more about what this or that candidate offers and how reliable and how trustworthy he or she is if my vote is not going to decide anyway? It's just a waste of time. So then you will have a lower quality of choice because people will not have a motivation to increase the quality of their choice by learning more about the object of their choice, or the
candidates and parties for whom they are going to vote. So this is called rational ignorance. The voting public is ignorant, but that doesn't mean that they're stupid. It rather means that they're smart, because it doesn't make much sense to be well informed about politics, because it doesn't improve your ability to make a choice. It doesn't improve your benefits in any shape or form. So that's from the voter side. It's not much better from the political side. So what is the main politicians? What is the economists say the goal function, which is the final goal that they have, the overarching goal that they want to achieve. So what is the main goal function of politicians? Above and beyond anything else, whatever public interest, nice kind of nonsense. Election, to get elected and re-elected. That's all. You're not gonna miss. You can assume that in 99.9%, that's the goal function of any politicians, to get elected and re-elected. And then to do while in office, whatever maximizes your chances of re-election. Okay, let me ask you one thing. Do you think that most choices that politicians have to make are easy choices? That sometimes, how many times they would need, in order to do what is right, they would need to do something which is unpopular in a democratic society. If your only goal is re-election, then you would tend to do things that are politically profitable for you in the short run, which means that your decisions will be offering short-term benefits to society, to voting public, at the expense of the long-term economic health of the country. So politicians have what is called the short-sightedness, which means they have a short time horizon. They will make decisions that will maximize economic benefits for society in the short run, while kicking the can down the road when it comes to long-term costs of their decisions. Public debt, taxes, failure to reform the social security and Medicare system. Who cares? You make decisions now, and then once the society, once the bills come due for your decisions, somebody else is going to be in the office. You go into debt right now to build, to invest in infrastructure. 4 years down the road, you build whatever you want to build, and you claim political credit for government spending. Look how nice I was as a politician, offering all kinds of goodies to my constituencies, while somebody else, the future taxpayer, is on the tab for that. So see, then the democratic society, paradoxically and disturbingly, democratic system encourages actively the short time horizon and short-sightedness among politicians, encouraging the profligate government spending in the short run while ignoring the long-term costs. So that's one element. Another element that has to do with the interaction between voters and politicians is that it's always more profitable for a politician to offer not only short-term benefits, but the benefits to concentrated narrow interest groups at the expense of a large majority of the population. So that's another inefficiency of the political system. Why offering concentrated short-term benefits to interest groups is better for you electorally and politically than offering benefits to the largest part of society? What do you think? That's the logic. Dispersed costs concentrated benefits. And dispersed costs
in the long run. So you want to disperse the cost of your actions among as many people as possible and in as long a time period of time as possible. Whereas you want to concentrate the benefits that you provide as a politician by using your taxing and regulatory powers on very narrow groups and in the short run. So the answer is simple insofar as it points to the fact that it's always easier to claim credit for something that is directly visible and observable. One example, tariffs are better politics than free trade. Why? Because you can claim, look what I did. I provided jobs, I secured certain jobs for American steel workers and aluminum workers, and for American steel and aluminum companies that they haven't had otherwise. What are the costs of tariffs? Can you tell me? So benefits are for those firms that are protected by tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on importing goods. So they help domestic companies by allowing them to charge higher prices to domestic consumers by artificially increasing the costs for the foreigners. So they are beneficiaries. Who are the suckers? Who are the losers? Tariff policy. Pretty much the entire society, anyone who uses steel or any steel product directly or indirectly. So everybody will be paying higher prices for steel, and these higher prices of steel will be translated into higher prices of cars, tractors, combine harvester, high-rise buildings, and so on. Everything that needs steel as a product. But what is the catch here? There are few steel companies with a certain, like thousands of workers and owners, and there are millions and millions of people who would be hurt. But they will be hurt in the longer time period. And what is crucially important and sinister, their individual losses will be lower than individual gains of people who profit from tariffs. See? So the prices of cars will increase 5% across the board. Oh, okay, so that's bad, or 3%, whatever. There are some calculations that as a consequence of Trump's tariffs on steel, the price of cars that all of us pay increased by a couple of percent. Which is bad, nobody likes that, but it's not the end of the world. We can live with that. But for those people, that is a difference between, like the steel companies, difference between profit and loss, difference between no income at all and higher income, or 50% increase in income, or whatever the plan was, whatever the idea was. So you see, concentrated benefits in the short term provide great benefits to those interest groups, and they're much more motivated than to lobby the government for those benefits. That's the reason why nobody complains. Consumers do not complain about tariffs. Yes, we lose a little bit, 1% here, 2% there, but those are not such huge losses. They will have motivated all of us to band together and then ask the government to abolish the tariffs. So you see how political process favors inefficient policies by rewarding narrow interest groups, by offering them large benefits, and victimizing the rest of society to a smaller degree, and demotivating the society that way to do anything about harmful policies. So this is called like a political economy of the government. As the practical impediments to an efficient policy. So tariff is an inefficient policy. Every economist would tell you that. And yet governments routinely engage in these policies. Exactly because of the logic of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. Or another example, short-sightedness of politicians. Did you ever wonder how come that nobody does anything about the social welfare programs, the entitlement programs? A huge deficit in this program, huge, it is called unfunded liabilities. which means the promises that are made to pay future benefits to people that will not be fulfilled at the current level of taxation. Nobody does anything. Why is that the case? Just politicians are victimizing you, your generation, and younger people and slightly older for the benefit of people much older than myself. Actually. I'm a net beneficiary here. I'm in middle age, 45, so I'm somewhere in between. But you are the pure losers of the system. You will have to pay 13% of your income, just as I do. But once you get to the point to receive Social Security and Medicare benefits, you will receive much less than myself, and much less, even less than the generation which is 65, 75 right now. So you're the victims. Nobody cares about you. Why is that the case? Sorry to bring the news to you, because you don't vote. People 18 to 30 are the worst demographics. By far the lowest percentage of young people vote the election. So they can ignore it. Wherever your interests and your concerns might be are irrelevant. Most voters are people 60 years and older. So in order to get re-elected, that's where the votes are. So you cater to them, their concerns. There it is. Middle class. Why every politician insists that I'm a middle class candidate? Because 70% of Americans are middle class. Who cares about the poor? Let's say I care about the poor. That's nonsense, actually. They don't care about the poor. They don't pass any policies to help the poor because poor people are relatively few and far between in the electoral terms. Okay. Oh, we're almost out of time. Any final questions? No. I will post the homework probably tomorrow. And then next week we will have a review for the midterm. I will write down a document with main topics that you have to pay attention to, and we'll send it along over the weekend. And then on Tuesday we will have a review of the material for the midterm, and on Thursday we will have the midterm exam.